local national election or general election candidate, John McGahon of Fine Gael, Cathal Murchú, who is running for the Irish Freedom Party, and Albert Byrne, who is running as an independent. Good morning and welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
I'm John. You're going to be very well known to our listeners at this stage, and you've been in and out of these studios on a number of occasions. You're obviously, your party is also quite well known. I'm going to come to the other two candidates very quickly and just maybe let them introduce themselves, because I know, Cathal, you have run, I think, Albert, you've run in the local authority elections before, but it's in RD. So maybe you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I got interested in politics in 2000 after the crash. Having spent many years overseas, I worked in Africa as a teacher during the apartheid years, so I've built a sense of social justice, and I was appalled by the way the banks were bailed out, and I just don't subscribe to the idea that we can socialise losses and at the same time privatise profits. So I think we need in government people who can hold the government to account and can oversee policy and what's going through government, such as the Children's Hospital. We've gone from 600 million to possibly 2.4 billion. I think a lot of that actually is legal corruption, and I think that the lack of transparency in our system is allowing many people to exploit government projects, to inflate them, and basically take money out of pensions and hand it to criminals. That's my opinion on that.
Okay, and Cathal Murchú, you're running for the Irish Freedom Party. This is their first time to run candidates, I think, in any election. You just missed out, or something happened in advance of the European elections and you didn't get to run your candidate. A number of candidates running around the country?
Yes, we have, I think it's 13 candidates running in total all across the country. It's our first time in a general election, and we're very much looking forward to getting our message out there. We feel that I agree with a lot of what's been said there. A lot of the points and topics, I'm sure there would be a lot of overlap, but we would like to sort of bring up certain things around perhaps the issue about the EU and maybe immigration. That's something that's not been mentioned by any of the main parties. It's a sensitive topic, I know, but it's something that I think I'm hearing it on the doorsteps and on the streets in the county, and we want to just put that message forward in a sort of a managed, sensible way, and it's an issue that we think needs to be aired. Okay,
so when you say something about the EU, I think you mean quite specifically that you think Ireland should be leaving the EU.
Well, ultimately, yes, that would be our goal, yes, but we know it's not going to happen overnight. But we think at the minute, I mean, it's obviously this is Brexit day, Britain is pulling out. We have to renegotiate or have the conversation about evaluating our position within the EU, and we think that as a party and as a nation, the EU is not serving our interests anymore, and at the moment we are a net contributor to it, and as Britain is going to be pulling out, we are going to have to be paying even more, and we are thinking that it's not in our interests anymore around areas like the fishing rights, immigration, yes, sovereignty, and just the lack of democracy generally, and the ordinary people in the street out there are telling us that loud and clear.
Who, when you say the ordinary people, and I'm very interested to hear that you said you're hearing it on the doorstep and you're hearing it in the county. Yeah. Have you heard that in Dundalk, that there's a huge move that people are looking to leave the EU?
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of frustration out there that the people feel that they're just not being listened to and they're not getting a voice in these things. I say ordinary people, I mean people of different ethnicities as well. There's people from the Polish community coming forward saying that they're not happy with the levels of sort of mass immigration that's coming in, if you like, illegally, and from outside the EU as well. So it's not just the ethnic Irish people that we are talking about, but they are primarily saying that to us, yeah.
So the Polish people are telling you that it's all right for the Polish people to be here, but they want us to leave the EU, but yet if we left the EU, the Polish people wouldn't be here. Or they wouldn't be here legally.
No, they would be here. Nobody's going to say anybody that's here under EU law is going to have to leave. That would be ridiculous. No, anybody that's here under current EU law is more than entitled to be here. We're saying longer term we need to have more, we would like to have a little bit more control over who can and can't come in. We think that's a reasonable prospect to push forward, and I think that the system is open to a little bit of abuse, and certainly when you look at the refugee asylum seeking system, we want to help genuine refugees, absolutely we do, but that system is proven to not be fit for purpose. We have a direct provision system where things are done behind closed doors. community, our provision centres are being foisted on rural communities, and there's no consultation there at all. I think a lot of people would agree with that. And I find it quite strange that this hasn't been mentioned at all in any of the debates. I mean, it's mentioned throughout the whole year, and we have things like people trafficking and smuggling, and gangs are getting involved.
Well, we know we've people trafficking, and that has been mentioned, and it's talked about quite a lot.
I haven't heard it mentioned much in the election.
It's a completely different thing to what you're saying about that there is this will, or that there is this sort of consensus among the population, or there's a large portion of the people of the county. You said, I don't know if you mean specifically Dundalk.
Dundalk
we're unhappy with the EU and are unhappy with the immigration, and the reason I'm suggesting that it hasn't come up in the debates before is because they haven't said it to the other politicians. I'm just wondering why they are vocalising this to your party.
I wouldn't say they're not saying it to the other politicians. They are saying it to certain politicians, and they're just walking away. They're just not engaging. In areas around the UN Migration Pact, which Ireland, I believe, has signed up to, it's been brought up on the doorstep to other politicians, and they're just walking away. They're refusing to engage on it. Now, we are not. We are going to listen to that. We are not kind of afraid to be politically incorrect if needed be. So we're going to engage on that debate. Now, it has been brought up to other parties, and there's just absolutely no debate on that at all. And we feel that we have to tackle the hard questions around that. And that's what we're saying. Okay,
I don't want to get too bogged down in this one, but that's quite interesting. Cal, are you from this region yourself?
I'm from Armagh, just the neighbouring county, so just up the road. I do a lot of.
So, as in from tonight, you don't really have to worry about whether you're in the EU or not, because you're not.
Well, my point is, I actually genuinely do fear for the country down here. I think we're going to be at the behest of the EU.
But you're not. That's not.
No, personally, no. And I say that to a lot of my friends down here, that in Northern Ireland, we're going to be kind of insulated from the lack of democracy that the EU is going to be imposing on countries, and the UK has taken its control back. Yeah.
Okay, I want to let John in. John, first of all,
hello.
You've been doing quite a lot of canvassing around the county and certainly around the town here, and for the second time within a year, because you ran in the local elections last year. You came in on the first count. Are you hearing that our people here in Dundalk, people in the county, are very unhappy with the EU, that there's a will for Ireland to leave, and indeed are unhappy with the position in relation to immigrants?
I don't doubt what you're saying, with all due respect, and I take it at face value that people are saying that to you while you're canvassing. But I have knocked on thousands and thousands and thousands of doors, since I was first elected in 2014, let alone the last 18 months where I've been on the road twice for 2 elections. And I'd say the concept of immigration has been brought up with me maybe twice, you know what I mean, in a different context, stuff like that. That's me being totally honest. Maybe I just knocked the wrong doors, you were on different ones, so that's all. I can only comment on what's been said back to me. In terms of the European Union though, look, I'd have to respectfully disagree again. We're on different spectrums of this, where I see myself totally as Irish first, and I'm a real European as well. I value my Europeanness as much as I value being Irish, and the reason is the EU was set up to foster a spirit of community upon the European continent after 2 devastating world wars. If you look at Louth, for example, look at the amount of EU funding that we've gotten in the last 30 years. It's transformed this country. It's really, really important. I also think the freedom of movement is so important. I think cultures are enriched by cultural diversity, by people coming here to this country offering their skills, their views, their way of life. So for me, immigration is very much a positive thing. The freedom of movement in Europe is extremely positive. I can move to any one of the other EU member states tomorrow morning. I can start a family there. I can start to work. And I look at Britain and I look at the day that's in it today, and I have an overwhelming sense of sadness for the 16 million odd people who voted to stay in the European Union. Because I think Britain is making an incredible mistake that future generations will come to regret. But look, that's my 2 cents on the European issue.
Okay, they mightn't be talking to you about the immigration or the EU, John, but I know, and I'm quite sure you are getting on the door. We put the call out to our listeners because we're a community radio station here and we want to represent them, and we said, look, we have politicians coming in. If you have any questions you'd like asked or anything you'd like raised, get in touch. And I have to say, Fine Gael was very much in the firing line when this came back, John, and I'm sure you've heard this on the doorstep. There's a lot of stuff people are not happy about. We're not going to go into housing and the health system because that's been talked to death. But the other two things that came up were, first of all, the National Children's Hospital. What is the story there? And this week we have the Irish Times. I had to look twice. I thought it was a war of whispers saying, 450,000 is now going to be spent to find out why it overran. That's just throwing good money after bad.
So I didn't see that Irish Times article, and to be totally honest, I was having a chat with someone yesterday. I'm in an absolute bubble of campaigning from 10 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night. So you're actually kind of, when you're out knocking the doors flat out, you don't have access to your phone. You're kind of actually a day or two short with news. So I didn't see that article. I'll have to read it afterwards. Look, let's go back to the National Children's Hospital. One of the issues I have with it is that this is a really, really important project. No one can doubt that, how important it is, that it's been waiting to be coming along for a very long time. And unfortunately, the totally unacceptable overcost runs. It's crazy the amount of how far gone it has passed. There was a serious issue about that, and it's unfortunate, I suppose, that that's been allowed to kind of cloud the issue of how important the hospital is.
That's not clouding the issue. What's happening, John, is it happened on Simon Harris's watch. So why then should people return Fine Gael as well? To as I said, maybe possibly to waste more money. I mean,
well, I think why should people return Fine Gael? Like we spent the first 5-6 years, and I'm not into this revisionist stuff. I don't do it. I'm very much about the future, but just to give you the down low of it, we spent 5.5-6 years getting the country back up on its feet, which we did. That's fair enough. We've now had Leo Varadkar in charge of Fine Gael leading this country for the last 2.5 years. I think he's had some tremendous achievements in those 2.5 years. We haven't got everything right. He freely admits that himself. But I think it's pretty important that we have a very strong team. Like, we're looking at Brexit Day today. Like, look at the team we have there between Simon Coveney, Helen McEntee. I think it's very important that we actually return Fine Gael into government to continue to steer the economy the way it's going, to keep the country going the way we are. And I'm very proud to be a Fine Gael candidate, and I hope to be one of the TDs elected that will be able to vote for Leo Varadkar for Taoiseach in 2 weeks.
Okay, Albert, you had a take on the Children's Hospital there, and you seem to think there's something a little bit more sinister about it.
Well, I think we have to use common sense. Anybody that tries to get repairs done in their home or run a small business is well familiar with having the wool pulled over their heads. And I think that what's happening in the Children's Hospital is wool being pulled over the eyes of government in a very big way. I think that government is there to govern, but I don't think they have the experience in managing projects like this. And I think it's been pointed out in the Dáil that even the contracts that were raised didn't even come up to standard. Mick Wallace pointed that out. So, and he himself has done a lot of development. So I think there is a problem of a lack of transparency in government, which is why, as an independent, I see my role as going into government to prevent major losses resulting from that lack of transparency, and to ensure that there is organised crime in this country, and they are, I'm no doubt about it, exploiting the Children's Hospital to the tune of many, many millions of euros.
Sorry, organised crime?
Well, yes, I think there's in the sense that there are groups of people in this country who exploit government projects in order to make money for themselves.
Okay, and how is that done?
Well, it's by extrapolation.
When you say organised crime, are you talking about crime gangs? Are you talking about?
Well, I think any group of people that work together for criminal activity is organised.
Okay, well,
okay, and I think that politicians and public officials are taken advantage of to ensure that projects overrun through mismanagement of the projects. And I think that we need to bring in far more oversight in all government spending to put an end to this crazy situation where we have large projects just doubling, trebling in costs.
Cal?
I didn't see the article in the Irish Times that you're referring to as well, but I don't think our party could be held responsible for the mismanagement of the health service.
No, nobody's holding your party responsible for anything like that at the moment.
We do acknowledge that there's a lot of waste and a lot of inefficiency in the health system, and we've got 1 million people on waiting lists. It's just not acceptable. One thing we would say, we want more investment in nurses. We want to recruit more nurses.
Well, you say actually Irish nurses. On your website you say Irish nurses, and it did strike me when I saw that, because as somebody who spent much of last year in Dublin in hospitals and observing the health service, and I have to say, if it weren't for the number of European and indeed Filipino in particular nurses and Asian professionals that were there, both of my parents would have had an awful time. So I was very thankful for them. But you do actually state state Irish nurses?
Well, I think there's something failing when we can't train our own people. If we're sending our own young people, waving them goodbye at the airport and bringing in people from elsewhere, I think that's something that we need to look at. Yes, it's great to see that there are Filipino doctors and nurses coming in, and good luck to them, and that's excellent. But I do think it's sad that there's so many young doctors from this country who are now out in Australia. You've got things like that. So there's something not quite right about that. What is it that's making them want to emigrate from the country? Do they not feel that they have a quality of life here? So we want to retain our skills base from our own people as well. Yes, if we have requirements for people from elsewhere, that's absolutely fine, and we are not against that at all. On the contrary, we'd like to see good quality skilled people coming in, but we think it's sad that we are actually exporting our people away, especially from the health service.
Well, these people are going to Australia, and they're going by choice. And
well, there must be something wrong. There must be something wrong with the quality of life here that makes them want to do that.
Or maybe it's weather. I don't know, but they are choosing to go, and Australia is choosing to welcome them.
And they go in there and they go through a rigid immigration process. They go through a points-based process, and they get in on skills and talent only. It's not a sort of a free-for-all. So when Irish people export from the country, they have to go through that rigid process, but people come in here and they don't. So there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there and an unfairness which kind of disadvantages our own people.
Okay, John, I want to go back to something you said. You don't like this revisionism, and I'm not sure anything's being revised. I think people are just looking at what's gone on in the last few years, but I've been looking at your posters. There's a lot of them about. I have to say, your face seems to be everywhere. But fresh thinking, youth, energy, and commitment, and you also have your hashtag look forward. And I'm first of all, are you asking us, please don't look back, because you're not going to like what you want to see?
No, not
but
at
I'm
all.
also wondering, this fresh thinking thing. Fresh thinking from who? Is it,
from me.
Yeah, but no. Also, who are you saying that they isn't thinking fresh? Is it your own party, or is it?
No, I think I think it's quite simple, actually, right? I'm 29 years of age. I've been a Louth County Councillor for 6 years now, when I was elected at 23. And what I want to be is, I want to become a TD to legislate on national issues that are affecting my generation. And when I say my generation, I don't mean people between the age of 18 and 30. I mean people on the age of 40. So whether that's issues affecting childcare, whether it's issues which you were chatting about before we came on, whether it's issues about trying to get your foot in the property ladder for the first time, whether it's talking about issues like how flexible working has to become a real norm and not the kind of abnormality, or whether it's talking about getting more jobs, bringing more proper jobs back to the Dundalk, so people aren't all on a rat run into Dublin at 6 a.m. and commuting. I think it's very important that we get some fresh thinking in terms of a new TD who's going to legislate on those issues because he knows about them, because he's living through them himself, or his friends are living through them himself. You know it as well. Like, I've been commuting to Dublin for the last 7.5 years. I know exactly.
So are you saying maybe Dáil Éireann is no country for old men?
No, not whatsoever. Because even when I'm chatting to so many people about that, like, people are saying, yeah, you're actually dead right. We need to get a young voice in there in the Dáil. There's a lot to be said for a bit of useful determination. But even then, people who I'm chatting to say, and I don't mean to be putting into the debate of like younger and older, but even other people like, yeah, actually, John, you're quite right. Like, because my grandchildren are going through the same issue, or my children are going through the same issue. So it's not a kind of an age thing. But what I would say is, if you look at how much Ireland has changed alone in the last 5 or 6 years, I think it's, people of my kind of generation and age, we have totally new perspectives and new ideas, and I think there's absolutely no harm in kind of mixing it up in terms of our local TDs, of which we have 5, mixing it up with someone who is considerably younger than the people we have there now. So that's what I mean when I talk about fresh thinking. I'm talking about fresh thinking in terms of our Dáil representation here in County Louth.
Throw a few women into the mix as well, but anyway, that's another day's work. Okay, look, we have to go to a break, but we'll be back in just a few, so go nowhere.
On 97.7 FM and online. This is Dundalk FM.
Hi, it's Dave McGee here from Christy McGee Insurance, and we're delighted to be sponsors of Town Talk on Dundalk FM.
Town Talk.
Yeah, we are back here in the studio with general election candidates Cathal, Murchú, Albert Byrne and John McGahon. There's a few texts coming in there. There are questions actually that we cannot refer to for legal reasons, but one there, ask John McGahon, is it we're only work for 40s and under you're interested in?
No, just to go back to that, like, and it was quite clear from the kind of comments I made there beforehand that I'm not talking about that whatsoever. I think the issues that I'm talking about affects people throughout any decade of their life, whether it's someone their own age or whether it's their grandchildren. So just to make that very, very clear, which I did just beforehand.
Okay, John, the other thing that came up with a lot of our listeners, and I don't think, again, it's going to be no surprise to you, is obviously pensions, and a lot of people very irate over this. And I think Fine Gael has done a certain amount of backtracking, although it's still not completely clear what they intend to do over the pension age.
I wouldn't call it backtracking whatsoever. I think it's actually a good example of Minister Regina Doherty and the government actually listening to the feedback that was coming back from candidates like me right around the country. So to try and condense it in, because it is a kind of I suppose there's a lot of kind of it's a complex issue, and there's a lot of different strands whether you're in a public or a private sector pension, right? But to give the basic down low of it, right, the pension age is still going to increase to the age of 67, because when the pension age was set at 65, the average length of time of living at the time was something like 69, 70. That's when the pension age was set at 65.
We've a longer life expectancy, but you don't want us to enjoy it. Go on.
No, we've a longer life expectancy, but that's why the age was set at 65 in the first place. So now that's been revised. So it's going to be set up to 67. But the difference is, if you are in the if you're in the private sector, say for example, and your pension you have to retire at the age of 65, what Regina Doherty has said she's going to do, and this is very important, is they're going to introduce a transitional payment, which will be the same cost as your pension to cover you between the age of 65 and 67. Now the reason why that is so important, and like talking about issues that people are saying to me on the doorsteps, this is one that comes up every day. The reason why that is so important is, like, you have people who have spent 40 odd years of their lives working, never kind of had to say go on the dole queue or whatever. Like, they were lucky that they got good jobs and were sustainable for the best part of 4 decades, and the best thing about this transitional payment is it means that those people don't have to go down and sign on for a year or 18 months until they turn to 65. So this is a very good example of the government listening to it, Regina Doherty reacting to it. A transitional payment will be introduced and the details are being worked out by Regina.
Okay, and no signing on, because then Leo Varadkar wasn't sure whether they'd have to sign on or not.
No, the whole point of it, as I understood from Regina Doherty and looking at the media briefings that we get, is that the point of this transitional payment to be introduced between the age of 65 and 67 is actually to stop people from signing on in the first place.
And will that be means tested?
We don't know that yet. The details are being worked out.
There is a suggestion from a lot of people that it will be means tested, so therefore any of those people who've possibly worked for 40 years or more and who've saved their money for their retirement or their rainy day or whatever, and we're hoping, my God, I've looked after myself and I've got up and I've eaten properly and I've jogged every morning and done whatever, and I'm going to live into my 80s and I'm really going to enjoy it. And then Fine Gael is in, well, actually, you know what, we're going to raise this age because you're living longer, we're going to get more out of you, but you're still, you've worked your 40 years. So what age do politicians, what age do TDs have to retire it, or can they retire it, I suppose?
Well, I suppose they retire the day they don't win their seat, but like, to go on to that point, as in 2011 the whole thing of pensions, all that was changed with TDs dramatically, whereas pre-2011 if I did say 5 years in the Dáil and if I retired the next day I start getting a pension the following day, which was wrong. It's now been put back to 65, so if any TD in the Dáil today that was elected after 2011, they don't get a pension until they turn 65. When you saw
quite a lot there who were elected before 2011,
and we saw when you saw the Independent, the front page of the Independent, and that's why that is
those figures. Okay, I want to come to the other candidates on this. Albert, you're a working man, are you?
Yes, I am. I'm a systems analyst. I work in IT. I also do a little bit of private enterprise. I'm developing a clinic in my hometown. I retrained as a nutritional therapist, and I've experience in teaching and other areas, and so I come with a lot of experience to this position, plus living overseas for many years in different countries, Australia and Africa and Canada and so on. But what I want to say is I find it very sad that whenever we mess up in government, we go to the weakest in our society to claw back the money rather than looking at the reason why we lost the money in the first place. I think there's too much waste in government, and we need more transparency and reform of the way our systems are working. We just need people to go in there and look at things with a cold eye and sort things out, and we need proper management. We just don't need to allow billions and billions of money spent, wasted, and then turn around and say, well, we're sorry about that, but we're going to increase the pension age, we're going to pay a Paisley amount to people who look after children, who are our most important asset in the society, where emotional intelligence is what is causing the problems in adulthood, the lack of it, and the abuse of society we have come from. So there's so many things we need to be doing, but I feel that politics gets in the way, unfortunately.
Cal, the pension, are you looking at 65 or actually the pension in the north has been raised, hasn't it?
It has been raised slightly.
Sinn Féin were involved in that. And
yes, exactly, and there's a bit of a contradiction there in the two jurisdictions. But no, we do think it's unfair that people it's been raised to 67. Yes, people are living longer, and that's a good thing. But I don't think it's a bit unfair to be kind of forcing people to work on when they've moved the goalposts. So originally it was 65, now it's 67. I think people should be entitled to, if they want to retire at 65, they should be entitled to do that. If they want to work on, by all means, that's a good thing too. So I would agree with Sinn Féin's position down south on that. But there's other ways of clawing back money. I don't think we should be hitting people in their pocket there. They've looked forward to their retirement at 65. If you just stopped paying money to the NGO sector, or just took back a fraction of the fishing rights that we've lost to the EU, you could pay for the pensions overnight.
Will I just finish off on that point, just for clarity? And I always despise having to kind of use briefing notes because I like to think I'm well brief, but just to be clear about it, right? Under the Golden Years Guarantee, 66-year-olds, we're introducing a new state transition pension of €248 per week for those retiring at 66. In other words, this is being paid at a higher rate than the state contributory pension rate, and this is going to cost 150 million for the Exchequer. In terms of 65-year-olds, we're introducing a new state pathway pension for those retiring at 65 by maintaining the current payment rate but eliminating all of the criteria of job seekers, such as the requirement to be actively seeking work or the restrictions on travel. Those who've worked all their lives should not have to feel that they're signing all in the dole, and we will end that. So that's
okay, but they didn't
clear.
say they don't have to sign on. They just said that they're not subject to the same because if you are signing on, you have to be actively seeking work, and as you said, travel. You can't be just sign off to Spain for 6 months of the year.
I think that's a pretty good outline of where we intend to go with it.
And I also, they didn't mention whether or not it's going to be means tested, and I think that could be,
and that's exactly something that
a lot of people,
that's if I'm elected to the Dáil, that I'd love to be talking about those exact type of issues.
Okay, a very quick question, and I want to, before you finish up as well, I want to give you all a chance, maybe just give you a minute to sort of put your own case forward. I put this to the other politicians the other day that were in with us. RTE, should they have excluded Mary Lou McDonald from the main party leaders debate? Cathal?
I think it's not really for me to speak about Mary Lou McDonald. I think we should have maybe opened it up to some of the other parties as well. It's not really a two-party system anymore.
Well, it's not a two-party system, but you're working on the premise that these were potential Taoiseachs. And therefore,
well, I think Mary Lou herself said that she doesn't think she's going to be Taoiseach.
No, I don't think Mary Lou has said that at all.
Right. Well, fair enough. It's not for me to say, but it's not an argument that I would be advocating.
Maybe you're not paying the €160 a year that the rest of us are paying, so maybe that's. But Albert, how do you? Because they are the state broadcaster.
Yeah, I am troubled by that decision. It does sound as though the state is, taking sides in national politics, which really the people should be deciding on. There are a lot of people who support Mary Lou McDonald, and whether or not I support Sinn Féin is immaterial. I do think she's a democratically elected leader, and her role is important just as anybody else's is. So, my own instincts would be there's something a bit sinister in excluding a leading politician from a debate.
I have no issue. If she wants to be in the debate, let her in the debate.
Oh, she wants to be in the debate. Yeah,
let her be in the debate. I think it's far better. As we were actually talking off air before we went back on after the ad break, I think it's so important that the Irish people get a really clear look at everybody who is looking for their vote, and that's the best way to do it, and that's the only way people can make really proper choices. So absolutely, I'd let her in the debate, and that's what Leo Varadkar said as well a few days ago.
Right. I think it was Leo did. Micheál Martin wasn't having none of it there. But look, another question I have, and this is ourselves here. You've knocked on the door of a community radio station now to do a little bit of canvas, and this is what we want to talk about, and it's the sustainability of the community radio sector. We have been operating here since 2004. We were awarded another 10-year licence in 2029. We've over 70 volunteer presenters. They're from all age groups, backgrounds, abilities. We're on air 24/7, and we train about 20 new presenters a year. In this country, there's 20 fully licensed community radio stations like ourselves. 17 are developing, and we pay a levy each year. Here at Dundalk FM, we have paid over €12,000 since we began broadcasting. Now, what we are asking each of you now is, if elected, would you make your voice heard in the Dáil, so that when people pay their €160 for their television licence, or indeed whatever may come after that, the media licence, that a percentage of this will be given to community radio stations? And we should point out, this is not for big salaries. This is because most of our presenters, as we said, are volunteers. This is just for our running costs. We estimate that it costs about $70,000 a year to keep the station on air. John?
Yeah, like I first came in here when I was 16 to speak to Harry Lee in 2008 about Barack Obama and the US presidential election. I've been in here so many times since. I love coming on. I think community radio is fantastic. And the final thing I would say about it is, if I'm elected to the Dáil in 7 days, I'd love to come back into you, Marissa, and other people in Dundalk FM, sit down for an hour and a half, have a proper chat about some of the issues that you guys are facing, and then raise them and support you in Dáil Éireann on community radio.
Okay, Albert?
Yes, well, I think community radio, is a fantastic thing to have, and it's a bit like, we took away local representation in the small towns, which is where local people could go up to somebody in the street and have a chat about issues that affected them, and there was really very little or no cost savings. So I find it very strange that we aren't, as a society, supporting the end of the spectrum where it's costing so little to supply such a great service, whether it's local representation or local radio. So certainly, I think that if the numbers stack up and show that local radio is reaching out to people, then that's a valid argument for local radio to be getting a certain amount of the licence fee that's coming through.
And Cathal?
I would absolutely agree with that. Yes, the money that's given to the RTE licence fee, take some of it off the Ryan Tubrides of the world and give it to community radio. Yes, I have experience. I work in a community radio station in Belfast, Irish language radio, and it would be very nice if some of the volunteers who do excellent work were to get some little bit of financial reward for it. So I would say absolutely, yes.
Okay, and finally, I'm going to give you a minute each. I'm going to start with Albert. And Albert, maybe you just tell our listeners why you think you should be elected to represent the constituency of Louth and Eastmeath in the next government or the next Dáil.
Well, for one thing, I come from I have a very varied background and quite an analytical mind, so I can look at what policies going through the Dáil and see the holes in that are allowing for losses that are leading on to clawbacks from such things as pensions and so on. But I think we need independents in the Dáil who are not saddled to a party creed that can speak out and point out what the problem is. So if I was elected for Louth, I would be looking at ways in which more funds could be made available to Louth to help with basic services that would help to reduce the causes of crime and to give our young children who are starting out a chance to develop their emotional intelligence and take a better part in society.
Cathal?
Yes, if I was elected, and I hope I am, but I'm being realistic about it, I would say we would be advocating for an open and honest debate on the EU and the immigration process. We think the refugee process is not fit for purpose. We want open consultation with local communities. We want to start the conversation. We feel that the local people of the county are not being listened to on a number of issues, and Irish people are the same as every other country in the world. They just want to be spoken to and listened to, and we're going to put that forward, and I will be certainly advocating strongly for their rights around things like free speech and fishery rights and the EU generally.
Okay, and John?
Yeah, very briefly, I'm 29. I've been a councillor for the last 6 years. I absolutely love my job of being a councillor for my native town and representing Dundalk, and I'd like to be able to do it on the national stage in Dáil Éireann, and the reason is because I want to be able to promote Dundalk as the wonderful town that it is. We have such a positive news story to sell about Dundalk town, and to really highlight that it's the place to come to work, it's the place to raise a family, and it's the place to really start a life, and that's what I want to promote about this town in Dáil Éireann.
Okay, well look, as I say to everybody that comes in here to the studio, I do wish you all the best on polling day. No matter what, you've put yourself out there, and respect for that one. That is candidates John McGahon of Fine Gael, Cathal O. Murchú of the Irish Freedom Party, and Albert D. Byrne, who is an independent.
97.7 Dundalk FM Town Talk.